Okay, so session number 1, Bridge Technologies product range. So the monitoring solution, for those of you who are unfamiliar with our monitoring solution, I expect most of you have at least some information about our product range, and you've seen it before, and you may have seen some of the products. You may even have sold some of our products. You may even have supported some of our products. Good to you if you have. So we can do end-to-end monitoring, and typically we look at things like backhaul services with satellite downlink, IRDs, fiber ingest, re-encoding, remultiplexing, repurposing, and then hand off to distribution networks, regional head ends, all that sort of thing. Digital terrestrial, we monitor digital terrestrial, cable distribution, OTT at the origin server and at CDN, and we even look at the home and access networks with our micro VB product. And new in this year, although it's not actually new this year, it did actually come out last year, but the VB440 uncompressed video over IP. We'll have a complete session on the VB440 uncompressed video over IP later in about, I think, probably about 7 or 8 weeks time. So let's start straight away. So we have the standard chassis. Oops, sorry, I've gone too far. I forgot there were animations on this presentation. So we've got a standard chassis. The standard chassis holds up to 3 blades. This is the chassis that's been around forever, if you like. VB120 and VB288 probes, if they're being used to control RF cards or interface cards, they must be housed in the leftmost slot. Can everyone please turn their microphones off, please? I don't really want to have to go around turning everyone's mic off for them, but I will do if I have to. But it will slow down our presentation. Slots 2 and 3 can house any other interface blade, so RF cards, ASI cards, but they cannot be in a chassis on their own. They must have a VB120 or a VB288 IP probe as a controller card. It can additionally hold up to 3 120 or 220 blades, so you could in fact have 3 completely independent IP probes sitting in one chassis. As you can see, it has a front power connector. It's available as an AC variant from 100 to 240 volts and 440 volts DC. And just to let you know, its ventilation is side to side, because this obviously will matter when it's housed in a rack. So the VB330, the 10 gig probe, cannot be housed in this chassis. That's because there is not enough power in the power supply. So that's the standard chassis. We also have the enhanced chassis. I won't pass that, no. So I'm still getting used to this. This is number 1. The enhanced chassis. So the enhanced chassis, as you can see, has a grill at the top. So that's the easiest way to recognize them. Also, it doesn't have a power supply connection at the front because the power supply is at the back. It has an uprated PSU, and it also has dual PSU. So again, it will house a 120 and a 220. It will also house up to 2 VB330 blades. Now there is a power supply. Limit, so we can only put 2 VB330s into an enhanced chassis. 2 10 gig probes. The power supply connectors have now gone round to the back, and it's a dual PSU. It's also available in AC and DC versions, and this particular chassis is vented front to rear. So again, that may be a consideration when being housed in a standard 19-inch rack. Okay, just to summarise, we have the standard DC chassis, the standard AC chassis, and we have the enhanced chassis for AC, DC, and the enhanced DC chassis. As you can see, the enhanced chassis costs more, but it has more intelligence built into it as well, with things like software controlled fans, which the standard chassis do not have. So when you're talking about loading VB120 and VB220 and VB330 IP probes, just bear the chassis in mind. All the information is on the website, as I said. So the VB120, the sort of, well, it's not actually the bottom of the range, because we have the, it's not actually the bottom of the range, because we have the NOMAD, and some people would consider the NOMAD as the entry level probe. Nevertheless, the VB120 is our sort of entry level probe. It's an IP probe, but it also acts as a low cost controller card for RF cards. And in this way, it's minimally specified out of the box. So out of the box, it'll do 10 IP streams and no ETR290 testing. So it's a low cost option if you're just doing RF monitoring, for example. You may be monitoring a bank of IRDs or a satellite downlink, in which case you want some satellite cards, but you're not interested in the IP functionality of the 120 card. These can all be optioned later with license. So, standard, it comes with an electrical RJ45 monitoring port for 1 gig data monitoring. It also has a separate SFP optical input, which is optioned. It's not a standard feature, but it can be optioned either at the time of ordering or later on in the line. You have to put an SFP in it, because it's just an empty slot at this particular point. So the good thing about this, it gives all of our probes have dual data inputs, and this is quite important. It gives you the ability to monitor 2 completely separate networks, maybe a main network and a backup network. If your probe is being used for multicast monitoring and OTT monitoring, then it's a really good idea. In fact, we would absolutely recommend that if you're doing multicast monitoring and OTT monitoring, you keep them separate. So you have, say, the RJ45 for the RJ45 for say the multicast network, and then use the SFP optical input to monitor the OTT. We'll talk about this later in another session as to the best reasons why, but it's basically about making sure that the traffic is kept apart for monitoring purposes. So the 120 can monitor 10 multicast streams out of the box, and you can upgrade this in tens. So you can upgrade it to 20, 30, 40 and a maximum of 50 multicast streams. When I say multicasts, I also include unicasts. So if your switch is set up to forward particular unicast to a port, and you use something like a tap, for example, you can configure all of our probes to look at unicasts, but you will need a tap. Now again, the VB120, the VB220 and the VB330 all come with a factory option of a 32GB SD card. Now it can't be retrofitted, so it has to be ordered at the time. But it's a great little tool because it enables you to take a large number of transport stream recordings. You can actually make TS recordings of the MPEG transport stream, and you can also make PCAP files, PCAP recordings. So in other words, you can actually record the IP packets. And these are very good diagnostic tools if you're having problems with the transport stream, or if you're having problems with in the MPEG layer, or if you're having problems with the IP layer. You can make these recordings. Now, all probes can actually make recordings, but they can only make 2 recordings maximum. But with the addition of the 32GB SD storage card, then you can make dozens and dozens of recordings. Now, the VB120 also has an ASI input on the blade itself. It's an SMB connector, so you will need an adapter if you're going to try to use a BNC. And that ASI, it has full monitoring capabilities, including all of the ETR290, or as I should possibly more correctly call it, ETR101290. So that's included in the VB120 base model. And we can add up to 50 ETR engines to this. So if we've got 50 multicasts, we can also upgrade with a license to 50 ETR engines. So we could be monitoring in live parallel form ETR290 of all of your multicasts if you want to. Gold TS monitoring. I'm not going to talk a lot about Gold TS monitoring at the moment. We'll talk about that when we look at one of the probes in ETR290. But it's basically the ability to capture a snapshot of a transport stream and then use that snapshot as a reference stream. So it's very useful when you're downlinking from satellite or anything like this, to be able to capture a snapshot and then monitor that transport stream 24/7 and generate an error if the transport stream in any way differs from the reference stream. It's a very powerful tool and very useful for things when you need to monitor the contents of a transport stream. The VB120 can be specified as an option with 5 OTT engines, up to 5, so we can do 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, and each of those OTT engines can monitor up to 10 adaptive bitrate OTT streams. So that gives you a total on a VB120 of 50 OTT streams, 50 ABR streams. We can also option microbursting on the VB120. As I said earlier, the VB120 is very commonly used as a controller card. Now, all of our probes with the 5.5 release support HTTPS, so it can work in secure environments. The VB220 is the first probe that can be available as a software or a hardware probe. So this is available as a 220 blade or available as a software probe to install either in a server at your customer's site or in a virtual machine environment, or even in the cloud, something like AWS, Amazon Web Services. You can deploy a VB220 into the cloud quite easily. There'll be more sessions talking about cloud and virtual machines later. It's very similar to the 120 in that it's a 1 gig probe with 1 standard input and a licensable second input. However, the difference starts is right out of the box. It can monitor 260 multicasts. There's no licensing for this, it just comes 260. Now, of course, when I say 260, I mean up to the line speed. So we've got a 1 gig probe, and we've got about 950, 960 megabits of usable bandwidth. And so you can have up to 260 multicast streams so long as they don't exceed that bandwidth. The ETR options are exactly the same as the 120, up to 50 engines. So we have actually that's incorrect. Actually, that thing that says ETSI TR101290 of up to 5, that's standard is 8, and then we have the bulk engines going up to 50. Don't worry, you won't be tested on this. 10 OTT engines, again, exactly the same. Sorry, that's wrong again. Oh, where did I get these cards from? Sorry. It's 5 OTT engines, not 10. But the ability to fit the 32 gig of SD storage, that's exactly the same. Must be ordered at the time of purchase, can't be retrofitted. So the VB220 also has some additional functions that are only available as options on the 120. Full service monitoring, we'll deal with this when we look at the 220 in more detail. IGMP V2 and V3, source specific multicasting support, and Code of Practice 3, so FEC analysis and monitoring. We support Microsoft Media Room and microbursting as well. And again, up to 3 blades fitting into a chassis. If you want 3 VB220s in a chassis, no problem. Supports HTTPS again for secure environments. Many people now are insisting on HTTPS and certificates and stuff like that. We'll deal with that when we look at the individual probes. Now, the VB220 is also available as an ATV option. ATV, for those of you who don't know, is a peer TV. So we can slot a completely independent VB220 into an Appear TV chassis. It fits into the 1RU and the 4RU chassis. It is exactly the same specifications as the VB220. It operates independently. It's not connected to the ATV backplane. It only receives power. So basically, it's about real estate. If you've got an ATV system that you're selling or that customer already has, you can just say, well, we can fit a 220 for full IP monitoring straight into a chassis, into a spare slot. You don't need any more real estate. You don't need to add an extra 1RU chassis. So that can be quite useful for things like air conditioning, power requirements and stuff like that. Notice there's a URL at the top. You can go to this URL, bit.ly/BT_manuals. That will give you access to all of our manuals. Now you can get these off the website, I know, but there's one place where all of the manuals are in one place. So feel free to download any of the user manuals, and also the full specification is at https bridgetech.tv/products. So much more than are on these slides. So please feel free to look these up at any time. You can download product sheets, product information sheets, technical specifications. You can send them on to customers as PDFs, very straightforward. The VB330, of course, is also available as a hardware or a software probe. The VB330 is our 10 gig probe. Again, one data input available as an option, standard, and the second as an option for, again, this main and backup network scenario. It's an XFP Plus connector, so you again need these connectors for the empty shell. 1 PPS, so we've got 1 PPS coming in for very accurate timing from GPS. Real-time monitoring of up to 2,000 streams. Now this is again straight out of the box. It's not optionable or licensable. It's just there. And of course we have to say up to, because it depends on how much bandwidth each of the unicast or multicast take up. That should say unicast and multicast. I think I've got the wrong presentation here because I was updating this earlier this morning, and I think I've actually loaded to my WebEx the older version. Anyway, so the 1 gig probes can do 5 OTT engines. The 10 gig probe can do 50 OT engines. So that gives you the possibility to monitor in one chassis, one blade, up to 500 OTT streams or OTT channels, whatever you want to call them. Again, the option to fit 32 gig SD card, 400 ETR engines. So we could be monitoring 400 multicast streams. Now that's not 2,000, you can do 2,000 streams, but you can only monitor a maximum of 400. That's parallel 400 monitoring. Of course, all of our ETR engines support round-robin testing. So that means you can assign 4 multicasts to one engine, and they will be tested in a round-robin fashion. We'll look at that when we look at the probes themselves in a couple of weeks. 2 blades per chassis, maximum of 2 blades. We support remote PHY, so layer 2 tunneling protocol is supported in the VB330. This is very interesting to cable operators, layer 2 tunneling protocol, remote PHY. Of course, we support HTTPS. We also support media room, of course. And we support jitter analysis for monitoring the total trunk load on a 10 gig interface. It's available as a software probe, as a hardware probe. And when I say software probe, I mean that's the software to be installed on the customer's server or hardware server, or in a remote, in the sort of virtual environment, and also in a cloud environment. But it's also available as a VB330 appliance. So in other words, we supply the server and we supply the software, and that's just installed that way, preloaded, switch it on, it's ready to go. So let's look at some of the interface cards now. We've got the VB242. The 242 is a 6-input ASI monitoring card. 2 of those inputs may be simultaneously active, input 1 and input number 2. So you can be monitoring simultaneously 2 inputs, or you can attach BNCs to all of those 6 inputs and you can monitor them round robin. So if you think about it, we've got 2 inputs on this card and we've got 1 input on the VB120. So that gives you the ability with one of these cards to monitor 3 simultaneous ASI connectors. And if you install 2 of these cards, then you would have 1 on the 120 and 2 on the 242 and 2 on the other, which gives you the ability to monitor 5 simultaneous streams in one chassis. Or one continuous on the VB120 and 6/12 on the round robin on the other cards in the chassis. This also comes available as a redundancy switch. So for example, if you've got a multiplexer or some other device with an A and a B, or you've got a main and a backup encoder/multiplexer chain. You've got a main and a backup mux with an ASI output, and you could use this as an active switch monitoring the main and the backup multiplexer or any other devices that have ASI outputs, and you can make an intelligent switch. So you can switch between A and B using any ETR290. In fact, more than ASI, more than just ETR. We can add other Bridgetech checks, we can do the gold TS, so we could cause a switch on any of these failures. It can be completely controlled automatically by the user-defined switch parameters, so set it up and forget it. Or we've got the manual mode where it can be controlled from a web GUI or a third-party NMS, something like SkyStream's data miner or some other something fairly simple that a user may have designed. Or it can be controlled from the front panel. So you could just go up to it and make an AB switch on the front panel. That's only if it's in superlocal mode. If it's in the auto mode, then the switches have no, someone can't just come up and just press the buttons and think, oh, what does this do? Click. Well, that won't work if it's in the auto mode or the manual mode. So, moving on to our first RF card, the VB252 DVB-T2. I'm going to flow through these pretty quickly because all of our RF cards physically are identical. A standard single interface with a second optioned interface that's already on the card. Dual input terrestrial receiver. All bands from 7 to 1000 meg. It supports 2 and 8K COFDM mode and up to 50 channels per input. So each of those RF inputs could have up to 50 channels. Now, obviously, you can only test one at a time, but you could round robin up to 50 RF DVB-T2T channels. For 6, 7 and 8 megahertz channel bandwidth supported. It's fully compliant with ETS 300 and NORDIG. Supports T2 Lite, so this is quite useful. So if someone's using T2 Lite, then we support that straight out of the box. Not an option, it's just there. Mega insertion package and T2MI analysis all built in. There are a whole host of RF measurements, and there are a couple just there: pre and post forward error correction, bit error rate, signal to noise ratio, signal strength, and there are some others as well. Full ETR 290, priority 1, 2 and 2, 3 testing and alarming. There's a constellation diagram, and because this is DVB-T T2, we support impulse response, and that's displayed on intuitive graph, very easy to spot. And of course, obviously, it's got a 1 PPS GPS input for those SFN network measurements that you need to do. There's the, for those people in the territories that use ISDB-T, we have a fully functioned ISDB-T, the VB288 card. And again, I'm not going to run through all of these. We support the signal frequency range from 42 up to 1002 meg. Supports ISDB-T, ARIB and standard B31. I'm not completely familiar with those, so please don't ask me about those. You'd need to look on the website to see the full specification for the ISDB-T card. So moving to the cable world, the VB262, DVB-C, and it's also QAM, DVB-C QAM and VSB. So this will do both QAM and VSB for those different markets. Again, single input by default. Second input, just a license. You just talk to the business. Your customers talk to the business partner. You guys, you talk to us. Generate a license key, and bang, it's working. No card replacement, nothing like that. Very simple, very straightforward upgrade procedure. So fully compliant with 300, 249, QAM 16 up to 256. Frequency range 50 to 1003 meg, 8 VSB, so it's the 8 VSB mode. Wide symbol range from 0.87 to 7 megabaud. 50 channels per input. That's the same for all of our RF cards, by the way. ITU, Annex A, B and C, and a range of RF measurements. Most of the RF measurements can be alarmed if any of them fall below user-defined parameters. We also have a DVB-C2 QAM card for anyone who's going up to QAM 4096. It doesn't seem to be. We developed this card for a Swiss customer. I don't think we've sold an awful lot more of those. I don't know how much C2 is going to impact the marketplace. With remote PHY, maybe less so than it may have done without remote PHY and layer 2 tunneling protocol. Anyway, it's there. Should anyone ever express an interest in C2, there it is. Onto the satellite, the VB272 S2 probes. S2 is there by default. So fully dissect 2 compliant, DVB-S 2 to 45 megasymbols, and S2 4 to 30 megasymbols. There's the range, 950 to 2150 megahertz, and it also supports up to 16 and 32 APSK. We support gold codes, root codes, and both. And there's a huge number of satellite parameters that we monitor or we measure. We measure them. We don't necessarily, on the satellite card, we don't necessarily alarm on all of them. In fact, we don't alarm on all of them. About half of them are just monitored. Things like low density parity check. We monitor that, but we don't alarm on it. Now, using the external integration interface, our northbound interface, these parameters are exportable to some higher level NMS. It's just that right now, at the moment, bridge technologies don't generate alarms. We do things like pilot detection, frame length. Constellation diagram. Now the difference here is that it comes with F types, but you can order them with SMA connectors if you want. But again, that's done at the factory at the ordering stage. And the satellite, we also offer this as a redundancy switch. So whereas before at the ASI, the 243, we were looking at the output possibly of a multiplexer, an ASI output of a multiplexer. Now with the VB273, we're now looking further up the chain into the modulator itself. So we can now offer full intelligent redundancy of modulators. This was built specifically for a customer in Norway. We have sold them. We have sold them since. So if anyone wants intelligent redundancy, looking at any RF parameter and all of the ETR290 parameters. So if you think about this, the RF parameters are looking at the modulator output. But when we dive into the ETR290, we're looking back at the multiplexer and back at the encoders. And rate changers and all of those MPEG-y things that precede the modulator. So that's why it's intelligent, because we're looking very deeply into the chain. Exactly the same type of redundancy, full auto, defined by user-defined parameters. The user decides what causes a switch and what doesn't. Manual mode, web interface or NMS, and super local from the front panel. So let's look at some of our other probes now. We're now entering the range of our software probes. Software, mainly software only. But we have the VB288, which is a Objective QoE, and by QoE we mean quality of experience. All of our probes to date have all been looking at quality of service at the IP layer, at the RF layer, at the OTT layer, but now we're diving into some of these and actually extracting some QoE metrics. We extract thumbnails, for example, the VB288 as it currently stands. Now, I'm not giving away any secrets, but this we'll be looking at exciting new products in this type of environment at IBC. So stay tuned for that. I can't say any more about that at the moment. But right now we're looking at thumbnail extraction of up to 100 multicast or OTT services. So you could do 50 multicasts and 50 OTT, 75-25, 90-10, or 100. So it's very flexible in that way. We do SD and HD encoding, MPEG-4, HD, H.264. We also support AVC as well. That doesn't say that on there. PSI, SI detection. Now, if you want to get thumbnails into your VB-C system, then you need, or your remote data wall. Again, we'll look at these in more detail later, later weeks. But this is where the thumbnails come from. If you want thumbnails in your monitoring system, your Bridgetech monitoring system, then you need a VB288 to extract the thumbnails. We can generate multiple alarms, things like scrambling, freeze frame detection, color freeze detection, audio silence, audio loudness, although it's not on that screen. We can detect audio loudness and we can generate alarms. GOP sequence analysis, a group of pictures. And quite new, or relatively new, MOS scoring of unscrambled multicast and OTT. For those of you who don't know what MOS scoring is, we'll have a whole session on MOS scoring and VMAF, the one below. MOS scoring just gives you a score between 1 and 5, and it tells you MOS stands for mean opinion score, and the O is the opinion is the. We'll look at that later, but basically it gives you a score between 1 and 5, how good your picture is, based on things like blockiness, blurriness, noise, luminance, and things like that. So it's looking at the picture and establishing how good that picture is. VMAF scoring of OTT scoring, that looks at the different profiles and looks at the different qualities of the different profiles. Again, we'll look at that later. Now, we do support AES fixed key encryption. It's not on there, but it is AES fixed key encryption. We also support Varimatrix VCAS. And we are looking at other encryption standards for OTT. So those are coming, and if you have customers that want a specific OTT descrambling, then we're looking at those, and we're eager to look at anything that a customer wants. And the remote video wall supports 4 displays, 4 remote video walls, and 64 thumbs. So 64 thumbnails basically is 4x4. It's a very handy little video wall. You can see that video wall on the right there. That's what we're showing. We can show thumbnails and widgets. And those are just web pages available anywhere on your system. Remember the remote video wall, because we have something else to show you. So the video bridge controller lies at the heart of our system. It's an NMS. That's exactly what it is. It's a network management system. It's also it's quite complicated. No, it can be very simple, but it can also be quite complex because there are lots of options. 2 or more probes. It will provide a management system for 2 or more probes, up to more than 100. So it will support a very large monitoring system, distributed monitoring system. It does things like alarm management, so you don't get alarm storms, multi-user access, user access control. So depending on your login name and credentials, certain people can log in as super users, other people can log in as read-only access. And we'll see this when we look at our VB-C system on the later WebExes. Up to 2 years storage of monitoring data. Now, one thing I haven't said is that the probes themselves have a monitoring window of 4 days. And after the 4 days, the monitoring data just falls off the end. But with a VB-C, you can store up to 2 years monitoring data. Highly configurable displays, multiple ways of showing data, user data, so the users can configure the VB-C to show exactly what they want to show, how they want to show it. Remote data wall. Now, we talked about a remote video wall on the 288. Well, now we've got a remote data wall. We'll look at that in a minute. Timeline. The archive server is available as an option. We can archive thumbnails and other data. It will generate reports. Very, very complex reports or simple reports going back 2 years. Great for management reporting. Trend analysis, fantastic for that sort of thing. An option to have the graphics module will allow users to design and configure their own alarm maps. So if you're familiar with things like Data Miner, then with a VB-C and graphics option, users can design their own mini Data Miner. It only works as far as Bridgetech probes and VB-C, but it gives you that same sort of flexibility. And of course, everything's web-based, so it can be remote. You can be logging into a VB-C in London. The VB-C may be in London, but I can be monitoring that from Oslo or New York. It's very, very flexible. So the remote, now that we talked about the remote data wall, so here is the remote data wall. It's an option in the VB-C. Enables users to generate their own canvases, highly configurable. Probe data, thumbnail data, external data. So it's user configure canvases, very, very easy to configure. Drag and drop, resize. So you can put a thumbnail, you can drag and drop it, you can resize it, move it anywhere, change the background color, you can highlight frames, you can have text. It's very, 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 very flexible as to what you show. It's HTML5 based, so it's very simple to use. Multiple canvases, hundreds of different canvases if you want. You can assign canvases to any device, so you could assign it to a smartphone, so when that user logs in with their smartphone, they get the same canvas every time. You can assign it to a smart TV Say, for example, in a customer's reception, they may have large TVs. They often do. You could assign a remote data wall to one of those TVs and have a running display of all the services, for example. Dynamic updating of data, so as soon as it changes, then the remote video wall changes. Multiple probes and VB-Cs viewable on one or more screens. External URLs, you could even have things like a stock ticker running, something like that. Anything that external, you could easily do that. There are 17 widgets, including things like clocks, weather data, alarms, audio bars, multiple different. Again, if you go to the bridgetech.tv/products, you'll get a full rundown of the how this remote data wall works, and we will be looking at it later in this series. Archive server gives you the ability to archive data from probes and the VB-C. It's separate to the data that the VB-C archives. It's completely separate and it has its own interface. Thumbnail pictures, including HEVC. We can download. We can archive the thumbnails, EPG, GOP structure, audio loudness, captions. We said captions. SCSI-35 signaling, all of this data can be archived for months, and it's in a very, very simple to use GUI. You can scrub up and down the GUI. You can change the range from 1 second up to an hour, 6 hours. You scrub through the timeline with the mouse. There's a calendar option, so you could just go straight to the date and time you want. And the more RAID you have, the bigger the RAID, and the faster server, the more streams you can store for longer. So basically, it's just limited by your hardware. We specify a minimum hardware, and then if you exceed that hardware, then you can specification. Then you can download. You can archive more streams, and it's basically a VB-C option. Although it's a VB-C option. A cost you have to pay for the option, then you need to add the hardware in order to do it. But all of the interface is via the VB-C. Micro VB, we're getting near the end now. Micro VB, some of you may know about the Micro VB, some of you may not have heard of it. It's basically a very small device, very low cost device, cheaper than a set-top box. Continuous 24/7 analysis in customer premises. It can be mailed to a customer and installed by a customer. Can also be installed in something like, it can also be installed at the edge of the network, for example, in a DSLAM. Set-top box independent. It does things like media loss, jitter, bandwidth, RTP packet loss, TCP, packet drops, and you can do a traffic breakdown, and the traffic between the micro device controller and the little micro VB itself is encrypted. Very low impact, not a great deal of traffic in normal use. I think it's about 20 packets a second go back from the device to the MDC, so it doesn't impact the customer very much at all. But it can be accessed for real-time analysis, and we can do 8 streams, 8 UDP streams or 8 TCP streams, so we could be looking at multicast or OTT traffic. Again, a whole WebEx session on the Micro VB coming soon. NOMAD is our standalone product. It's sold completely differently to all of our other products. It can be sold not only by our business partners, but it can be sold by retailers effectively. If they want to sell them, they can sell this. It has a very similar functional spec as the VB120, plus it has a satellite input, a cable input, and a DVB-T2 input. So all of those can be used. It can be monitored. There's an ATSC and terrestrial version for the US, so it comes in 2 versions. 32 gig. That 32 gig of onboard SD card is standard feature. No extra cost. It's there when you buy it. It generates its own Wi-Fi hotspot,
So you don't even need to connect a PC to it. You can just join the network and you can monitor anything that's there. No moving parts. It's a fully die-cast aluminium chassis, so it's very robust. It's got an external power supply. We have an optional northbound external integration interface. It's not standard, but it can be. There are several options like multiple ETR engines, multiple OTT engines, multiple multicast options. So again, there are multiple options, but standard, off-the-shelf, base price, very, very powerful device. And it can also, it doesn't say that on there, but it can also be part of a monitoring system. So although we sell it purely as a standalone device, something an engineer can carry around, it's very light, it's very portable. It can also, if it's licensed, it can also be part of a Bridgetech monitoring system. So it can report back to a VB-C if you want it to. So there's no limit to the power of this little NOMAD device. It's really nice, very affordable. I think it sort of starts and is sort of the €5,000 mark. I'm not entirely sure of the price. If you're business partners, you can go on to and log into the BP website and look at the price. But it's really low for what it does. It's really powerful and it's really low cost. There's nothing like it on the marketplace for that price. Pocket Probe, well, we still show the Pocket Probe. We've got the Pocket Probe Android and the Pocket Probe iOS. Again, it's available. It will do OTT testing using obviously a Wi-Fi network. So it will make tests wherever the Wi-Fi network as an access point in the Wi-Fi network. It will do that testing from that access point, and we'll do multiple OTT testing. Supports HLS, HDS, Dash, Smooth, and you can get I think you can get a free. I'm not sure the state of this. There used to be a free version and a paid for version. Not quite sure how this works now, but if you're interested in this, you can get in touch with me or your BP manager. It's still available. Just download, just look for Pocket Probe. I think you look at Pocket Probe, all one word, in the App Store or Google Play. Still available and still working. And full feature parity, by the way, between iOS and Android. Now we're getting very close to the end now. We've got the VB440. The VB440 is our uncompressed monitoring device, fairly new. It's available only as an appliance, so we only ship it and sell it as the software already on a pre-specified hardware server at the moment. It comes in various interface speeds from 10 all the way up to 100 gigabits. We support standard definition, high definition, high dynamic range, 4K, and ST2022-6, -7, 2110, 2030-40 and 2059-6 PTP clock analysis, 8 simultaneous users, either going via a web GUI or via the instrument view. Again, quite a new product. It's selling really well. There's a huge amount of interest for people who are just starting in, particularly in 2022, SDI over IP. And of course 2110, which is really, people are still dipping their feet into that, their toes into that. New features coming all the time. Again, we'll have a complete session on the VB440 later in the series. The instrument view, which is basically hardware interface panel. Effectively, it's an iPad. Well, no, not effectively. It is an iPad in a die-cast aluminium mount. So all of that capability that we saw, it's an interface to the hardware VB440, and that comes in a 19-inch rack mount, as you can see there in that picture. It also comes in a VESA desk mount with a pneumatic arm, so it can be, in an MCR type environment or somewhere like that where it can be pushed out of the way. Complete touch panel, and it also comes in a desk stand. Again, an aluminium mount just sitting on a desk. It requires power over Ethernet, so PoE, to keep it charged, and obviously access to the network. You can actually use Wi-Fi as well, but the PoE you can actually define as an Ethernet connection straight to the network. Okay, so we've got to the end of that session. It took me rather longer than I was expecting, but that's okay. I've imparted quite a lot of data. Now you can do this quiz. There are more details. I'll follow this up with emails to everybody. And you can download sorry, you don't need to download the quiz, you just go straight there. It's a Google quiz, and 15 questions, and anyone who completes 70% of those at the end of this, which will be probably in the best part of 6 months time, we'll get a nice little quiz, and it'll also enable you to test your knowledge just to see how much you've taken in.